please. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jim Matto. I'm the soon-to-be former president of the local Trout Unlimited chapter, and I want to thank Windham Regional Commission for doing all the heavy lifting and getting us together, and the Connecticut River Watershed Council, and I shouldn't have started. I'm going to forget other people who co-sponsored this, but thank you to everybody for that. What I would like to do is we need to do a very brief business portion of the Trout Unlimited chapter meeting, which shouldn't take more than a minute or two, and then we'll turn the meeting over for the reason everyone's here primarily. And that is, if you are a Trout Unlimited member, did you check your name on our list when you came in? If you didn't, please do. I'll pass that around later. And you should have picked up one of these, which is the slate of officers that we're looking at for the new thing. If you're not a Trout Unlimited member, don't vote, or vote early and often, however we're going to do that. So actually, you'll see that there are 6 names on this list and 1 empty space. We are 1 short of the 7 board members that we may and should have according to our bylaw, but we can proceed. If there is any member here who is not on this list and would like to be stepping up and considered for the board of directors, this would be a great time to make yourself known, because I have a pen. We can do that.
And it's not necessary to nominate yourself for the secretary.
Right.
We will find someone to fill that.
You're right. We could move names if necessary on that. So, going once, going twice, opportunity missed. Okay. But thank you all for being here. With that, I would like to entertain a motion to, well, first, any nominations from the floor, again, formally, I just asked that, but be sure, no. I would entertain a motion on this slate. We have a motion, David?
Motion that nominations close and that the treasurer, in this case, be directed to cast 1 ballot for the slate of officers nominated.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Members of Trout Unlimited Chapter 450, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Fastest business meeting you've ever been at. Thank you very much. And we'll get on with the meeting. Chris Campany, Executive Director of the Windham Regional Commission, will talk a bit about resiliency and how some of these things fit together. Rich Curran from the Fisheries Program will focus more than others probably on the critters that some of the Trout Unlimited members are here to learn about. David Dean, who's probably worked more than most people you're going to know or meet on the Clean Water Act, will tell us a little bit about that. Jim Ryan will talk about the water quality and roadways, and really, I often like to tell people, if you look at a map of the Windham region or any place in the country, frankly, and squint a little bit to make it out of focus, if you're looking at it, the rivers, the roads, and the settlement pattern sort of all form the same pattern, and the connection between those is very real and very strong. And Ryan Patch from the Agency of Agriculture, which certainly is the big piece of the Clean Water Act, will talk about that. So with that, my last action, and at the end of the meeting, by the way, we didn't list him on here, my apologies for that, but Mitch Harrison, who you just elected as the new president, will have a little bit to say about the coming year in Trout Unlimited. So my last official act is to assign myself the coveted role of timekeeper. And if you look at the agenda and look at the clock, it's going to have to be tight. So please don't be offended when I make that nasty motion from the back of the room. And Chris, if I can remember the instruction.
So while we're waiting, I'd like to introduce Kim Smith. She's our lead person on water quality work and natural resources and energy for the commission. And she did a lot of this, getting this set up, so thank you so much. Also recognize Alyssa Savetto, our staff person who's got the lead on emergency planning and project review, and our AmeriCorps member who's membering with us, not volunteering, is Andrew Gwynn. Can you raise your hand or stand? And he's also worked with the Conservation District with Jolene Hamilton.
And then I'd also like to recognize Gloria Cristelli and the Southeast Vermont Watershed Alliance and the Connecticut River Watershed Council. So they're also co-sponsoring this event with us. So
Thank you so much.
thank you all.
All right, so Jim, I'm starting my time now. So, all right. Windham Regional Commission, we were established in 1965. We assist towns in 27 towns in southeastern Vermont, all the towns in Windham County, Reedsboro, Searsburg, and Winhall, and Bennington County, and Weston and Windsor County. And our mission is to assist towns in southeastern Vermont to provide effective local government and work cooperatively with them to address regional issues. And the commission is composed of town-appointed commissioners. The select boards appoint our commissioners. I just want to start off with this. It's when you do water quality planning, town planning, virtually everything that we do is based in a regional plan. What the work that towns do is based in town plans. They establish policy which help guide actions that lead you into the future. I love this quote. Available futures are not just those that we can passively forecast, but those that we can actively create. They are futures which do not simply happen of themselves, but can be made to happen if we meanwhile adopt wise attitudes and policies. And what Windham Regional Commission does, one of the reasons why all the regional planning commissions have been asked to assist the Agency of Natural Resources with the implementation of the new clean water law, is we already assist towns in so many other areas, including transportation planning, hazard mitigation planning, town plans, land use and policies, town zoning bylaws, flood hazard bylaws. In most towns, if you walk in and you see maps on the walls, we did those. So we do GIS mapping and inventories, including roads, bridges, and culverts. And now something new that we're doing is water quality law education and outreach, especially as related to town infrastructure. We're not so much doing this with ag, not that we're opposed to doing that, but ag is in this case, doing it more themselves. And then we also do a lot of work around project implementation and administration, especially for our smaller towns. We actually help towns get projects done. So we don't just plan, we also help with implementation. Now, the world of the Windham Regional Commission, and frankly, all the regional planning commissions changed with Irene. Just here, I mean, the interaction between water and our infrastructure and our communities, as Jim mentioned, our settlement patterns basically follow the water courses. In Windham Region, we had 113 major town bridges and major culverts damaged, over 40 major stream crossings closed on town roads, roughly 100 miles of town roads were affected, and more than 1,000 culverts were estimated to be affected. There was a lot of damage here, and the role of the Windham Regional Commission in this really was to work with the towns to help them understand what was going to happen as FEMA came in, and what the state was going to do to assist towns. But the state also tasked all the regional commissions to help towns with their recovery. And one of the things that we did, there was an education and outreach aspect. This was soon after Irene. We actually had a joint meeting of our road foreman and our Natural Resources Committee, where we brought out one of the flume tables. And these things are great. They show how rivers or streams interact in a larger landscape, or you can even put in a culvert like this and show how a culvert acts. It's a great tool. And now through a grant that we've gotten with the Conservation District related to the Saxons River through the High Meadows Fund, Conservation District now has a flume table. And I am so excited about that. I can't tell you. I'm a landscape architect too, so you get to play with these things. It's awesome. But what I want to talk to you briefly about is that really, when you talk about resilience planning for infrastructure and improvement in habitat, they're really two sides of the same coin. We actually brought Jim used to be he's former executive director of Windham Regional Commission. We brought him back and worked with towns in accessing community development block grant disaster recovery funds. And in Athens, we have to replace 3 culverts. This is the original culvert, and you can see it's a hanging culvert, and it was replaced with a box culvert. And if you notice, one of the things that we did was, it actually sits into the stream bed. And not only does that allow better passage of water, and also importantly here, what the water is carrying, like ice or, in this case, it'd be sticks or branches or other things, but it also allows critters to go back and forth, fish to swim back and forth through there, salamanders, turtles, whatever. And here's another one. This one's not quite done yet, but it'll have the same effect. Again, the culvert was originally hanging. Now it sits in the stream bed and it won't wash out. Jim, tell me if I get the story wrong, but their strategy during Irene was to have a young man, I think a 14-year-old young man, on a backhoe, and they told him, when you see water coming over the road, pull the culvert.
Yeah, that's the higher one, and that one got washed out years before, and they knew it was going to happen again, so that's what they did, and it worked.
And so importantly, Alyssa works with towns to develop hazard mitigation plans so that they can develop capital plans to replace this infrastructure with infrastructure that's more resilient. So it won't cause as much damage in the first place, and it's less expensive to repair. And then the other benefit is it just works better with the hydrology of the stream and river. And Nature Conservancy posted this to their Facebook page just a few days ago. They have culvert cams, and here you see a bobcat, here's a fisher, these are mink, here's a black bear, here's a deer. Now, of course, those small culverts in Athens aren't going to quite make it. You're not going to have a bear go through there necessarily. But just to say that these crossings are so important, and it's important that we get them right. This is Adams Brook in Newfane. We're working with the town to undo some of the work that was done post Irene. Adams Brook Road was at risk of eroding down into the stream, but the armoring was a little excessive. And so here you can see what it looks like. It formed a pool up above, and the problem is now the stream is running down this side. If you notice here, there's a trailer sitting right up here above the pool, which is now eroding. And so we got our ecosystem restoration grant, working with this number of different people in the room: Marie Caduto, ANR, Gloria with the town, Jolene with Conservation District, to fix this, to restore that habitat. To restore the stream function so that you don't have these risks, but at the same time it'll restore the habitat. And so we do a lot of work like this, helping towns in a variety of different ways. Another thing that we do in our hazard mitigation planning is reminding towns. We have a lot of changes in select board members and planning commission members, and sometimes it's important for us to kind of remind folk of what has happened, what can happen, and what will happen. So this is a stretch in South Newfane, pre-Irene. This is dirt right after Irene, infrared photo. If this isn't necessarily water, it's cool mud. That's ostensibly what you're looking at. And that really shows you, right, the extent to which water flowed, kind of recaptured its old channels and flowed into its floodplain. And, here's 1938 flood. This is the Reverend Claxon house, if you know Williamsville. This is the old house. Here's the covered bridge in Williamsville. This is the house that's right on the other side. And this is what it looks like today. But unfortunately, a lot of people forget that that's what it looked like after Irene. And so 1938 and 2011, we fixed things and people forget. This is just up the road, the Hagenauer house, 1938 flood. And this is an after photo. Of course, it's gone. But and now that's a buyout property. Again, that's something that the town of Newfane did. In a number of cases, right, we've gone in and using FEMA funds, purchased homes that were damaged or at risk, and try to restore, remove the hazard, but also, to the extent you can, restore access to the floodplain. And this stuff has deadly consequences. This is Warren Brook in Ofsted, New Hampshire. You may remember this as back in 2005. There was a culvert right here, and it had about 30 feet of fill up above it. And what happened was, after a long period of rain, the culvert plugged up, and basically a reservoir formed behind it. And that's what happened downstream from that. Of course, this is nearby, and this can happen anywhere where the conditions let this happen. But Mitchell, you were involved with a group that restored some of the habitat here, right? I mean, out of this disaster came an opportunity to where they restored. This is where the culvert was. This is that area where it blew out before. And what they did, groups there worked to restore access to the floodplain. And here you can see a culvert that is active when you have a high water event. It helps relieve the pressure on the bridge right here. So instead of just building a bigger bridge, they restored more access to the floodplain. And this is a cost-effective way to make that habitat even better. Here you can see the pool and riffle structure improved. So, Jim, I have 39 seconds. So I'm going to leave you with this quote from Wendell Berry. Such pondering on the facts of gravity and the fluidity of water shows us that the golden rule speaks to a condition of absolute interdependency and obligation. People who live on rivers or in fact anywhere in a watershed might rephrase the rule this way: do unto those downstream as you'd have those upstream do unto you. And to me, really, this should become the mantra of all planners everywhere, because a reminder really of the situation we all live in. And then David Suzuki noted, we all live downstream, so none of us are immune from this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rich Kern. And what we wanted to do was talk about how there's going to be a lot of discussion around the water quality issues. I know a lot of people are going to be concerned about the cost, but one of the things we really wanted to also reinforce was the benefits of these water quality protection measures. And trout are actually great indicators. Now I should say, as you just saw, I'm an officer of Trout Unlimited. My professional life and recreational life kind of cross paths here. But trout are great indicators because of the whole food chain and streams about how healthy the waters are. So thank you for coming.
Yep, thank you, Chris. So I'm Rich Kern. I'm a fisheries biologist for Vermont Fish and Wildlife. Been there about 29 plus years. I also coordinate our trout management and aquatic habitat program, so hopefully I'll be able to speak intelligently on this. So starting out, we have a host of fish in Vermont and a few non-native species. Some of them we love, some of them we don't care for too much. As far as stream fishes, the big three, you've got brook trout. This is native to Vermont. It's a fall spawner, and it's also the most sensitive to high temperatures, so it needs the coldest water. Also pretty resilient to pH, to acid waters. Brown trout were introduced from Europe in the late 1800s. Have become naturalized throughout the state. Bat and kill, lots of waters around the state have wild brown trout. Also a fall spawner, grows to large sizes. Rainbow trout were introduced from the western United States, also in the late 1800s, spawn in the spring, and have the most problem with acidic waters. That's why places like the Deerfield drainage, you don't see wild rainbows. But there's also other fish living in our stream systems, critters like burbot and some of our Connecticut River tributaries. Rainbow smelt will run from our cold water lakes up into tributaries to spawn in the spring. Suckers, slimy sculpin, often associated with trout, good indicator of cold water and good water quality. Variety of minnows. And then other critters. We got aquatic salamanders, wood turtles that also use the stream network. So beyond the ecological benefits and importance, we also have some social and economic benefits of taking care of our streams. Every 5 years, the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service does a survey of hunting and fishing activity and other wildlife recreation. The last one was done in 2011, and they found 1 in 5 Vermont residents fish in Vermont. So important activity for our residents. And they've, overall, over $130 million is expended per year in Vermont. So it's got an important economic interest. So aquatic habitat, we're talking water quality, temperature, dissolved oxygen, mineral content, things like that. The quantity of water, we have water withdrawals that occur and flow regulation. Physical habitat, we're generally talking about the stream bed, its banks, and the riparian area, the vegetation and land around it. So what's good habitat? For a stream, besides good water quality and natural hydrology, it's diverse. There's lots of different habitats. It's not all uniform. So you've got pools and riffles, you've got different velocities, different depths that different fish species use at various times of their life. It's complex. It's really has to do with the land around it. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the stream. You've got a carrying sediment, you've got deposition, you've got erosion that are undermining tree roots, trees falling in the water, all creating these various habitat features. And it's messy. Messy is good. That's when we have these trainings and talk to engineers, we try to convince them to manage for mess. It's kind of a hard concept. But Mother Nature's messy, and anybody in the room who fishes, this is the kind of place you want to cast your line into. And it's connected. We know a lot about fish movement, and we'll talk a little bit more about culverts as I move on. So our native trout, the brook trout, again has different life stages and uses different habitats. I'll just go through quickly an example. So in the fall, they start getting ready to spawn, and they'll need to find clean, small gravels. You know, brook trout maybe 8 to 10 inches when they're spawning, so they're going to look for that nice, clean gravel. And they often hone in on upwellings of groundwater to spawn, which, you know, if you think about it, makes sense. They're spawning in the fall, their eggs over winter. That groundwater keeps the eggs from freezing, also creates some flow, gets rid of the waste, provides oxygen. So like I said, those eggs will overwinter. And then as they hatch, you'll see these fish still have a little bit of yolk sac on them. And once they finish the yolk sac, they'll have to actively feed. And you can see they're very small fish. They're not going to be able to withstand very high velocity, so they're going to be in this margin kind of habitat, slow, shallow habitat. And over the course of the summer, they may get up to 3 or 4 inches in length. And then ultimately, the adults will use the deeper pools to be able to withstand the faster flows. So important features of aquatic habitat. Again, riparian vegetation. The land around is really what's going to essentially form and maintain the quality of the habitat in the stream. So important functions of riparian areas, shading is key. These are cold water species, they need shade. This is just an example of some temperature monitoring that was done in my area. So this is Route 100 in Granville Gulf. See the maximum temperature over the course of the season. Doesn't even reach 70 degrees. This is a good wild trout stream. Chelsea, the first branch of the White River, wide open canopy, nearly 85 degrees. Not much for wild trout. So temperature is key. And it's not just important for the stream itself, but water flows downhill, and if you have high temperatures in the headwaters, you're going to have high temperatures down below. So maintaining cool water temperatures in our tributaries also help fish in the main stem. So this is a small tributary, Crossett Brook in Waterbury, and which runs into the main stem of the Winooski River. And during the hot spells of the summer, those fish will congregate right at the mouth here. So that cool water from that tributary will serve as a temperature refuge for the adult trout in the Winooski River. Can people see this okay? Yeah. So water quality protection, filtering sediments and absorbing nutrients. Riparian areas give the land a chance to absorb and filter out sediments and other pollutants before it reaches the stream.
Excuse me, can you talk a little bit about sediment filtration, how that works?
Well, just by that overland roughness and capturing, instead of having a gully that's taking it right to the stream, it slows it down and it allows it to settle and settle out. Organic input and retention. So streams themselves need to get their energy, their food source from the outside, and that comes in the form of leaves and twigs and stuff dropping into the streams. So that's really the start of the food chain. And those leaves and other organic material needs to be retained in the stream channel. So what happens is microbes will work on those leaves. It takes them about a month to condition them before the little invertebrates can can work on them and effectively eat them, and then the fish eat the bugs, and we catch the fish. So it's not just a matter of the leaves getting in the streams, but you need enough channel roughness to maintain them there. And stream bank stability and aquatic habitat. So all that vegetation along the stream banks provides good complex habitat, stabilizes the stream banks at high flows. It's all good for fish, and it's good for us. We slow down the water, that reduces the velocity and its erosive forces. And I spent most of my career chasing fish around with electricity, and when you get into places like this, it's usually chock full of fish. And so these complex habitats really do a good job of holding lots of different fish. So besides riparian vegetation, we need clean stream bed substrate. We've got lots of sources of sediment, whether it's from our roadways, doesn't matter, fish don't care where it comes from. But again, trout need clean gravels. This is a wild rainbow trout in the Dog River. There's a female laying or digging out a red, and the male right here. And when we get too much sediment, we reduce its capacity for biological functions. We call it embeddedness. So instead of having a lot of surface area of the rocks, you can see this rock was covered up to here, to just the little top of it was showing out. So essentially it looks like a gravel parking lot. And that reduces the ability for fish to spawn and for bugs to attach, and reduces the biological productivity of that water. Habitat complexity, bedrock, boulders, cobbles, wood. Some of our higher gradient streams have a lot of roughness, a lot of big material, flows plunging down, lots of pools, different kind of complex habitats. And when you get down to the meandering, the lower gradient streams tend to meander. The habitat generally is focused on the outside bend, and we need that roughness in the form of wood and boulders and hard banks and riparian vegetation. So one of the things we saw after Irene was a lot of channel mining for material, and essentially what that did is took all that complexity out of the system. So, from what we talked about before as far as diversity and complexity, you're not seeing that there. This is the West Branch of the White River in Rochester. And in our follow-up stream surveys, we found that in those altered sections, they held much fewer adult wild trout, as you'd expect. Just another bed armor project. So instead of not enough roughness, we have a little too much. This stretch of stream, 700 feet, is subsurface. It's still that way today. But VTrans, this is a VTrans project, has agreed to go back and remediate that. There's another one on Whetstone Brook that'll be done as well next year. So, and we've also stepped back, with this type of treatment and reevaluated how we do it, and have kind of changed the practice, and had several projects done this year that were successful. The whole concept here is you've got a steep road bank going down to the stream, and after Irene, it cut the stream's elevation down. So what happened if you just did your normal riprap bank and carried it down to the stream bed, you'd have a tiny little channel width left. And the channel needs its full width to function properly. So the idea is to bring the bed back up so you'd have the channel width. In this case, the concept is that natural material will fill in and the flows will become surface again. Upstream of this is a series of beaver dams. There's not a lot of material coming into the system that's going to fill these voids and allow that to happen. Stream flow regulation is an issue we deal with. So ski areas take water out of our streams, especially this year, to make snow when they can. Hydro facilities will regulate flows, so those are things we need to consider. This is a hydrograph from the Little River below Waterbury Reservoir. The blue lines is the flow, so you can see it goes from actually no flow up to 700 CFS and down, so it's either, you know, an on or off type of situation. And this overlay is the temperature, so this is a bottom release. Water's coming from the bottom of a 100-foot reservoir, so cold water, and as soon as they turned on the spigot, temperature dropped, you know, 12 degrees in a very short period of time. You wouldn't do that to a goldfish, you know, from the fair. So our trout aren't going to handle that too well either. Toxic discharges is, it's not a common problem, but, you know, in my career, I've had a half a dozen or more significant fish kills as a result of toxic discharges. Several in the Dog River, Third Branch of the White, Thatcher Brook, Gunner Brook, and the last was the Cabot spill in the Winooski River. And then we have issues with exotic species and diseases. We try to get at that through our fish health program, where we regulate importation. We do inspections of private, state, and federal hatcheries, regulate bait fish, regulate the transport of fish, and also monitor wild fish populations. Habitat connectivity is another important feature of aquatic habitat, especially for trout, fish that move a lot. Certainly we know about dams, but culverts are, you know, there's thousands and thousands of culverts on the landscape that create barriers to fish and other aquatic populations. So we've got all of these on the land. Often they result in a loss of aquatic habitat. Not much is going to live in a bottom of a concrete box with 1/4 of an inch of water running through it, or corrugated steel. Often habitat above and below the structure is impacted, and more often than not, it's a barrier to fish movement. So fish and other critters need to move on a regular basis for feeding and resting, as well as seasonally for spawning, and also to deal with changing habitat conditions or life stages. They also need to recolonize habitats after either a natural event like Irene or, you know, one of those toxic discharges. Fish need to get back to those areas. We did work with the Forest Service on a tracking study of wild brown trout in the Battenkill. Implanted these transmitters into wild fish and tracked them over the course of the year. And this is just one of those fish. And you can see the summer range is in yellow. You can see that fish had 2 distinct areas where it hung out in the summer, about a half a mile apart. And yet it kind of hunkered down in this area in the winter. So it had very distinct habitats depending on the season. Now that same fish, so that's the previous slide, this scale is greatly expanded to over 5 miles. During the spawning season, that fish moved 9 miles to a spawning site. So these fish will move a tremendous distance. Our past ability to really track them was limited, and now with new technologies and tracking devices, we've really learned how far these fish move. So these impassable structures result in habitat fragmentation, population isolation, can alter the fish community above and below the structure. You may have different species. And also, as we chop up our streams into smaller and smaller segments, we become concerned about genetics. So again, trout, we love them, but there's other fish involved too that and other critters we're concerned about. And when I started, we knew bridges passed fish and we knew culverts didn't. So we would advocate at every time there was a new stream crossing for a bridge, and we were not successful. So we would compromise and we asked for some sort of treatment. So often we'd ask to put in baffles or sills. We'd ask for the culvert to be oversized. We didn't really know what that meant. We just knew we wanted it bigger than you were asking for. And we'd ask them to bury it, usually a foot. And more often than not, we'd come back the next year and it would be perched, just like you see most of our structures. And the reason for that is most of our culverts have been sized hydraulically just to pass a certain volume of flow. So you've heard about the 25-year flood, the 50-year flood. Well, town roads are generally sized to a 25-year event just to pass the water. And we haven't really considered that streams move more than just water. They move debris, they move cobbles and gravels. You know, Irene taught us that pretty well. And when we create these undersized structures, we interrupt the movement of that sediment. So oftentimes you'll have an aggradation of material above the culvert. As flows get high, water starts backing up, you can't get through the culvert, slows down, that big material drops out above it. On the downstream side, we have a fire hose running through that small culvert, scouring out this nice big pool and eroding around it, and so we have the bed degrade on the downhill side. So looking from the top, looks like an hourglass. Again, water backing up, drops out its sediment, you got the fire hose and the big scour pool. This is just a picture of a brook under a high flow up in the Sugarbush ski area. So that's an old boiler tube, but you can see what the stream is looking for, and we're just trying to funnel it down into that small pipe. This is the same brook a couple of culverts down. Again, you can see what the stream's looking for and what we've given it. So we ask an awful lot about these undersized culverts. We've done a lot of assessments throughout the state over the past decade or more, and rated these culverts as passable, partially or reduced passage, and impassable. Done over 10,000 of these. And just a subsample of these show that less than 6% of our culverts are considered fully passable for aquatic organisms. Most of them are in this reduced range, and a good 40% are impassable. So these are the culvert assessments we've done to date. We've got the state pretty well covered. You know, we're planning on filling in the southern part of the state this next year or two. Working with Trout Unlimited and Connecticut River Watershed Council. And this graph just kind of shows the, you know, how much fragmentation we have on the landscape. This is the lower White River and Sharon and Royalton, and you can see all of the tributaries that are moving into this system. And it's only these two that are highlighted in green of all of these tributaries that are actually connected to the White River, where fish can move from the White River into those tributaries. So we have the Interstate 89, we've got Route 14, and then there's a railroad that runs along the length of the White River. So, I mean, huge biological consequences of fragmentation. We've developed some guidelines for constructing and designing culverts. Worked, you know, it's an engineering document. We work with VTrans and DEC River Management. It's specific to our biology and hydrology, and these have been applied since about 2006. A lot of what we're doing are these embedded structures. This is actually a pipe, so it's got a bottom to it, backfilled with large material. It's bank full width, so you know, at those spring flows, that's what these things are sized for. So much bigger than the previous structures. This culvert went through Irene fine. This one is in Reedsboro, done by VTrans. Again, it's a box that's backfilled with suitable material. Again, that one survived Irene and looks fine. So, how to, you know, talk about habitat and the importance of it. Now it's like, well, how do we do, you know, how do we protect it? Well, one of the things our department is heavily involved in is the regulatory end of things. This is not fun, but it's important. So we get involved in Act 250, the Public Service Board, Section 248, stream alterations. Anytime there's a bridge or a riprap job or anything to do with the in-stream work, we have the ability to provide input into that. Hydro licensing, dams and Corps of Engineer. So there's a lot of regulatory tools, thanks to David and his work, that we get to help protect aquatic habitat. We're doing outreach and trainings. We do the rivers and roads trainings with VTrans and municipal transportation folks, where it's a 2-day course working with river management. where we use the stream table, as Chris mentioned. We get out, we do electrofishing, but we're essentially just talking and teaching about how rivers work and how we need to work with the rivers when we're designing and doing transportation projects. And we've been doing this for the past 3-4 years, have several hundred people through the system, and it's been well received, and we're seeing progress on the ground as new projects are being done. So we have the opportunities at times to do habitat restoration. This was a post-Irene mining and berming job, and Jim was involved in this, kind of forcing the issue that they did. The contractor in the town went back and did some restoration work, where they went back, first provided the proper channel dimensions, and then went back and added some roughness. So still not great, but a lot better than a lot of our streams were left. We also work in partnerships with groups like Trout Unlimited, watershed groups, on riparian restoration, in-stream habitat, working on the Battenkill with the Forest Service and the Battenkill Watershed Alliance. Stream crossing improvements. In this case, we have a perched culvert. And you can see, from years of this, again, another undersized culvert, lots of maintenance that has to go on because of, there's a huge scour pool over your head. But in this case, we're able to at least enhance this by putting in a natural, kind of more of a natural feature rock weir, raise the elevation to backwater the culvert and allow for better passage. Another project with the Friends of the Winooski River and Fish and Wildlife Service on a brook trout stream in Duxbury, where a series of weirs were put in to help improve passage. Dam removals. I know Ron Rhodes and David Shop is doing a lot of that now. We worked with the Friends of Winooski to remove one in Marshfield, culvert replacement in the Mad River. So lots of opportunities, lots of work going on to protect habitat, enhance it. And that's it.
Good.
Okay. Yep.
Are those programs for the rivers and roads training, are they mandatory? Can they be made mandatory?
V-Trans requires it of, they direct their staff to go. And it's actually several phases. There's an introductory online, phase 1, that the one I showed you is kind of phase 2, and a third phase is being developed for more construction, like project construction.
So I guess it's another, it would appear that our road crews who do a lot of that need to have that training.
Yes, and they are, and we do.
They're working down.
Yeah, we are. The road crews are coming. I don't know that it's necessarily mandatory for them.
We have 51 bridges in Newfane, to say nothing of culverts.
Yeah.
I know within the region, a lot of the road foremen and a lot of the
Right.
crews have been through the
Right.
training.
We just did one in Wilmington last fall. So we have a couple of north and souths and central ones that we do. And yep.
So in tracking the trout on the Battenkill, do you get a sense of what the fish were looking for their winter habitat versus their summer habitat? What type of?
Yeah, that particular fish, I wasn't involved directly in the project, but I asked the biologist who was, well, what did it look, from his eye, did it look like anything special where the fish was going versus what it passed through? And he couldn't tell. So they know what they're doing. There's a lot more we don't know than what we do know.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, along the same lines, in a smaller brook, do you have any idea how far brook trout go for spawning?
Yeah, they'll move quite a bit. I mean, back, I think it was like in the 60s, there was a landmark study at the time in New Hampshire, and they concluded that brook trout don't move more than 100 feet from where they were born. And what we found since with this, better technology is there is quite a bit of movement, sometimes miles. And just from a population persistence standpoint, it makes sense that fish are going to try to repopulate areas instead of stay put. And one thing they found is there's often more of a portion of the population that is more stationary and then movers. So.
I want to keep us moving if
Yep.
I can. But Rich, there will be time for questions at the end set aside for that. So some of the legislative history here.
Right. Thanks for the invitation. This will be the boringest part of the whole presentation, but I want to go quickly over the last 5 years, 6 years of legislative history, trying to implement, get this, and you're going to love the fluvial geomorphology. What do rivers do, and how do we live with them? So back in 2009, we started working on what in 2010 became Act 110. Required the Agency of Natural Resources to establish a shoreland management program. New Hampshire has had a program in place since 1991. Vermont has resisted, but we got it as part of Act 110. And as Rich has said, trees along the shore provide shade, provide food. There's a reason for trees to be there. Act 110 amended the requirements for stream alteration permits. Up until the passage of that bill, if the work you were doing in stream, take a big yellow machine, go into the river. If the river, this doesn't count on my time, right?
As long as he stays out of the river.
Okay. As long as the point at which you went into the stream, upstream of that was less than 10 square miles of watershed, you didn't need a permit. And for those of you, Smith Brook in Newfane, you could mine the whole thing, never need a permit. East Putney Brook, the whole thing, you wouldn't need a permit. You could run a big yellow machine all the way up through, no permit, okay? Just some of the folks in the room, I know that you know your watersheds. Act 110 said, nope, 10 cubic yards. If you're gonna touch 10 cubic yards of stream bottom, you need a permit from one of our stream alteration people. And later on, as part of 138, I make a point of mentioning that we require coordination between the stream alteration engineers and these guys at Fish and Wildlife, the biologists. They didn't used to talk to each other. They do now. You're going to hear a lot about roads. Jim Ryan's going to talk to you later. And under Act 110, we put a carrot out there. We said your local match goes from 20% to 10% if you adopt best management practices for how you manage your roads. And I'm sure Jim will talk more about that. After Irene, we discovered that we didn't have a uniform set of standards in terms of infrastructure. And municipalities were rebuilding to state-issued permit standards, and FEMA was denying reimbursement because we didn't have a set of standards that the town had adopted that matched what A&R did. Long, complicated. Act 138 coordinated the state. We now have one set of standards. It's the A&R standards, and it's what applies. After Irene, everybody got their big yellow machines, went into the river, shovel it out, move it out, strip the shores, do whatever. And there was nothing in place that really actually defined what in-stream material was. You know, it's hard to enforce when you don't know what it is you're trying to protect. We created a definition. And most importantly, we created a definition of large woody debris. Sounds silly? Go ahead, laugh. But it's any piece of wood within a watercourse with a diameter of 10 or more inches and a length of 10 or more feet with natural soil attached. And you can't go in and just pull it out. As Rich pointed out, nature is messy, loves having trees and stuff down in streams. We don't, but nature does. Irene hit, the governor suspended all permit requirements for in-stream work. Wasn't anything he could do because we didn't have a plan B. You either had to get the permit or we needed emergency action, and all permit action was suspended. We addressed that in Act 138 and created a Plan B. What do you need to do in order to react to an emergency situation? And again, it involves the fish and wildlife biologist, it involves the stream alteration engineers, and we now have at least a game plan of what are you going to do when we have an emergency. Towns have a role to play, and FEMA's idea of a flood is that the water rises, okay? And suddenly, you know, your first floor is filled with water, whatever. In Vermont, because most of our water is in streams, and in high gradient streams, the stream moves from here to there. And there is where the damage is caused. And this was how we were going to implement this whole new idea of how do rivers move, what do they do, and to help municipalities create planning and local bylaw structures to deal with hazard mitigation planning under the river conditions that we face. Not those that FEMA says exist, but those river conditions that we face. And then we asked the Agency of Natural Resources under Act 138 to do a study. We wanted them to document all water quality problems in the state of Vermont, all possible solutions to those water quality problems, and put a price tag on it. You have to be careful what you ask for. We got a report back, detailed the problems, 120, 130 pages, cost $156 million a year to address Vermont's water quality problems. Of course, that's not going to happen. And now here comes Act 64, which was passed last year. A couple of important things that it does. We, the legislature, know we don't have $156 million. We don't even have it over 10 years, let alone every year for 10 years. So we wanted to pick off the biggest sources of pollution that we could. So Act 64, targets, 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 and goes back to something that happened well before the timeline that I'm talking to you about, and that's river corridor planning. River basin planning. And we have our local expert with us tonight, and I'm glad she's here. To be able to identify the largest problems within sub-watersheds and be able to at least have a conversation about who's going to deal with that problem and what kind of resources might they need to be able to deal with that problem, whether it's erosion, whether it's a discharge, whatever it is, identify it, identify someone who might address it, and identify the resources that might be needed, strategic basin planning. Then Act 64 requires coordination between Vermont Transportation, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Fish and Wildlife Department, so that they talk to each other. And that's some of the projects that Rich was talking about, that VTrans is going back to undo some of the damage they'd done. They wouldn't have created the damage if they had talked to him first. But now, because of the coordination level, they're willing to address some of the mistakes. Okay, this isn't, the agriculture is not as big an issue in our watershed as it is in the Lake Champlain watershed. It is an issue because our watershed, the Connecticut River watershed, is part of the Long Island watershed, and the Long Island watershed is impaired. It has a dead zone, and the nitrogen running off our land here has an impact on the dead zone in Long Island Sound. But agriculture stepped up to the plate and has become a full partner in clean water through Act 64, and mostly because of the concern for Lake Champlain. Most people that I talk with in the legislature have no idea that there's a cleanup plan coming for the Connecticut River watershed, and they don't care. They do care about blue-green algae blooms in Lake Champlain that are killing fish by the thousands, that make the water unusable, that are reducing property values, that are closing businesses. And that is the kind of impetus that you need to pass this kind of legislation and to get the ag community to buy in. They have. They are full partners in what we're doing. And one of the things that we're going to do, most farms have absolutely no idea what their requirements are under the existing law. Major outreach, major education effort underway through the ag department, ag agency. Enforcement. There are some recalcitrant people. There are probably some sitting in this room, I don't know. But the fact is that at the point where someone doesn't comply after they've been told, this is what you have to do, we'll help you do it. We'll try and find some money to help you do it. And in fact, you don't do it, and we come back and say, what? Eventually, it comes around to enforcement. We increase the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets enforcement authorities significantly. And we hope they never have to use them, but they already have. Municipalities, roads. Roads are a big contributor, both in this watershed and in the Champlain watershed. Consequently, there's a schedule laid out to create a general permit that sets out the conditions of how municipalities have to manage their roads. Municipalities have until 2018 to complete their surveys, inventories, and they have until 2021 to bring themselves into compliance with the terms of that general permit. And then money. This all costs money. We created the Clean Water Fund, a new and dedicated source of revenue that does nothing but assist agriculture, municipalities, transportation in terms of addressing clean water problems. And the legislature said for the first 3 years, we would like to have a municipal preference. The reason is that the agriculture sector in Lake Champlain over the course of 2 years received some $60 million in additional USDA NRCS assistance. Connecticut River, in all 4 states, received $10 million additional NRCS assistance. No such money has come available for municipalities. So we wanted to make sure that municipalities got in line first. It won't be enough, but it's a place to start. The requirements won't change. The timeline on compliance will be a function of the amount of money available. So we, the legislature, will be back in terms of looking for additional sources of revenue. That's a quick history. That's not even all the provisions of all three of the bills that we've worked on, but it's been a lot of work, and it has been very gratifying. I'm really happy to have done it, and everybody's leaving you with quotes. My favorite quote is from David Rosgen, probably the father of geomorphology, river geomorphology. "We don't make many mistakes with rivers. We just keep making the same ones."
Hey folks, thanks for coming out tonight. Do I need to be nervous? Okay. I wanted to thank David for his work in passing Act 64, the Vermont Clean Water Act. It was a heavy lift and a long haul, and a lot of the work got done by David himself. And I just wanted to thank him for that. I'm going to talk about one of the components that David talked about in Act 64, the municipal roads general permit. A little bit of background on building a little bit about what David was talking about, and we have a limited pot of money, and going after the bigger sources of and trying to improve water quality. This was a modeling estimate done for Lake Champlain Basin of some sources of sediment and phosphorus to Lake Champlain, which can be extrapolated to some parts of the state, not necessarily all parts of the state, but just kind of give you an idea of the proportions. And with ag being the largest contributor on Lake Champlain side of 40%, stream bank instability, stream bank erosion, 20%, forested lands, and wastewater treatment facilities a little bit less. But we're going to focus today on talking about unpaved roads and developed lands and stormwater issues. And this graphic coming in about 6%. That was from modeling. UVM, Beverly Wimple, has done some in-stream monitoring from runoff from roads in general, especially gravel roads, in some of the smaller tributaries, the headwater streams and some of the larger streams, Mad River Valley, some of the smaller streams, and the Winooski River and some of the larger streams. With sediment on this graph here, Winooski in red, Mad River in blue, and some of the smaller tributaries from the Mad River. Sediment coming in at 35% overall for the sediment sources, and for the Winooski and about 20% in the headwater streams. And this figure here is connectivity. I'm going to talk about that. About a lot of the estimates come in about 50% of roads are connected to a surface water. So runoff from 50% of roads are the average statewide are getting to a water source. And phosphorus, the same thing. It's kind of reversed here, where we actually have in the smaller headwaters, the blue, we have larger percentage of phosphorus coming from headwaters because they're largely narrow valleys, more forested. So it kind of makes sense, kind of lower in the watershed, there are more sources of phosphorus, like some ag sources, some stormwater sources. Again, that 53% connectivity, bringing phosphorus as much as 15% in the headwater streams and 6 to 10% in the lower parts of the watershed. Now, we're not just talking about sediment and phosphorus, although that's kind of the focus. But as Rich was mentioning, we have sediment from roads that can smother macroinvertebrate habitat, also fish spawning areas. In addition to phosphorus, we have nitrogen issues on this side of the state, heavy metals coming off of roads, hydrocarbons, gas, oil, antifreeze, chlorides, salts. Road miles, we have over 16,000 or nearly 16,000 road miles, state highway and municipal roads. The vast majority are municipal roads, 13,000, and those are all class roads, class 1 through 4. This is kind of a breakdown of the road classes. For municipalities, there's a tiny sliver of about 1% of Class 1 roads. Those are generally village center roads with sidewalks, catch basins, paved roads. Class 2 at about 20%. Class 3, the vast majority, 2/3 of the roads. Those are your what you envision as your back roads, gravel road at 65%. And Class 4 roads, which are minimally maintained by towns, about 12%. As part of Act 64, our Department of Environmental Conservation is required to develop this municipal roads general permit. And the timeline is we have to develop a draft permit by the end of this year, December of this year, and a final permit a year later. And towns would start applying for coverage under the permit between 2018 and 2021, and we'll figure out that exact timeline as we develop the permit. The basics of the permit are we're going to identify that graph of the connected road segments. So the average, about 50% of roads in each town are connected to streams that can cause erosion problems. We're going to identify those segments of road to towns, so they'll have a map of where those segments are. And after we develop the standards for the permit, the practices that towns will have to apply, we'll make sure that those are applied in those priority or connected segments of road. So because we're really after addressing water quality, aquatic habitat, and we have limited money and time, that we're only going to go after the priority road segments. We're not going to regulate every road mile in every town, but just those road segments that can pose the greatest risk for erosion to waterways. One tool that we have right now is called this road erosion risk analysis. And I would encourage folks to look at the Agency of Natural Resources Natural Resource Atlas. There's some great data layers, fish and wildlife, stormwater, the geomorphic assessments that were talked about, hazardous waste sites, important spawning areas. That's all on this Natural Resources Atlas. One layer is called this road erosion risk analysis. Towns can punch in the name of their town, and they can come up with a map of their town with all their roads highlighted, and you can look at low, medium, and high risk road segments for erosion potential to waterways. We're going to take that next step and have those road segments. That's a GIS level assessment. It looks at road slope, proximity to water, the amount of stream crossings, if they're undersized, stream crossings, soil erodibility, and we're going to get that field verified for the entire state, for all the towns in the state, about 250 towns, and then prioritize those connected road segments and come up with remediation plans, restoration plans, and cost estimates for each town of how much it's going to cost to fix the sites and a timeline. For the general permit, we're going to ask towns to develop these road stormwater management plans. So it'll have the total miles of road in town with those priority or connected road segments highlighted. Which ones of those segments meet and do not meet our standards. I'll get into that in a minute. Towns that have already done a lot of work on their roads will be credited for that work. And then coming up with a 20-year plan for their sections of road that don't meet standards and how they're going to meet that. We want, in a lot of these practices, if folks are familiar with the Better Backroads Grant, these are relatively simple, cost-effective measures that will, not only improve water quality and aquatic habitat, but they will save towns money. In the long run, they'll be more flood resilient for the next Irene or hopefully lesser storm. These roads generally hold out a lot better in mud season, and towns are doing a lot less maintenance on these roads once they put in all the best management practices. Some of these practices are some that folks have seen: stone line ditches, check dams, turnouts, road crowning, culvert headers. A lot of this is getting water off the road as quickly as possible. and getting water to flow perpendicularly off the road as opposed to running down the middle of the road and carrying all that sediment and gravel with it. And then doing some sort of treatment or filter area before it reaches a surface water. This is kind of the direction we're headed, to have the standards or the practices on this axis here on the left. These are some example practices, match the road type. Right now, the existing standards don't distinguish by road type, and each road type has very different characteristics that these practices are not one size fits all. In village centers, right in Brattleboro here, we don't have ditches. We have catch basins and sidewalks and curbs. They're paved roads, so we don't need to crown the road if it's already paved. The gravel class 3 versus gravel class 4, we're not going to ask towns to fully maintain class 4 roads. It's actually in statute that we can't do that, but we can ask them to address major water quality issues on class 4 roads. It's a typical town road cross-section. So we're looking at the travel lane where most of the crowning would take place and have good surface material, and then a ditch treatment, turnouts, and drainage culverts. So this permit would apply to all town road classes 1 through 4, as I mentioned. In-stream culvert replacements will not be part of the permit, but drainage culverts will be, and culvert headers and outlet stabilization would likely be included as well. David mentioned the existing road and bridge standards. We're having discussions with VTrans. We meet with VTrans regularly on how the standards for this permit would line up with the standards that, the existing road and bridge standards that VTrans is administering. But if towns adopt standards, the existing standards, road and bridge standards, that applies to the entire town, all the road miles in town, and our permit's only going to focus on those priority reaches. I kind of mentioned this earlier before. Towns can get ahead of the curve and start identifying where their problem road segments are and start fixing them. And the Better Back Roads grant is part of the clean water money that David was talking about earlier, that tripled in funding from last year to this year, from a few $100,000 up to over $1 million for towns to do some of these practices that we're talking about: the crowning, the ditching, the culvert replacements, the culvert headers, stream bank stabilization, gully stabilization, are all eligible practices. We're working very closely with the Regional Planning Commission and transportation planners especially. We're doing a question about training road foremen. In addition to the Rivers Roads training, we're starting a roads roundtable that are focused more on road foremen exchanging ideas and brainstorming on the best way to install some of these practices, the equipment they need, and just have a dialogue between road foremen. And technical assistance from VTrans, the local roads program, and the districts, as well as our river management staff and myself, the basin planners, the river scientists. And our next steps we're developing this year is focused on developing the permit with the standards. We're having a core team help lead the process, a lot of VTrans staff and DEC staff, some Regional Planning Commission representation, the League of Cities and Towns. We have a technical team working on the standards, and then I'm getting out all over the state in venues like this, and meeting with the transportation advisory committees, county road foreman groups to get input from the different regions on how this might look. And I'll end it there. Hopefully I'm on time, and we can answer questions later.
Thank you.
Okay.
You guys are doing an amazing job of staying on time, by the way. And now a little bit of information related to I always get their name wrong, so I'm going to read it. Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, or better known as AG.
Ag, VAFM, Agency of Agriculture. Any one of those names will do. Great, so thank you very much for hosting this and inviting us to share some of what the Agency of Agriculture has been up to related to Act 64. My name is Ryan Patch. I'm a Senior Agriculture Development Coordinator with the Agency of Agriculture. My role with the agency is working on communications and outreach around agricultural water quality, and right now the big focus is on Act 64 and the rewrite we're doing of the accepted agricultural practices. They are now going to be rewritten to be the required agricultural practices, the RAPs. And I'm here this evening to talk about time. This presentation is normally about an hour, and our meetings generally run 2 to 3 hours with the groups we meet with, so it'll be a very condensed version. But what I'll do here is go over where we've been, what we've heard, and what the timeline is moving forward as far as the process for rewriting the rules and getting the rule into law by July 1st, 2016. Great. So what are the required agricultural practices going to be? The Agency of Agriculture was directed by the legislature to redraft the accepted agricultural practices, called the RAPs, pursuant to Act 64, which the governor signed into law June 16th of last year. We have been charged to revise this rule by July 1st of this year. So the AAPs have been in place since 1995. So there have been water quality rules on the books for agricultural operations of all sizes for 20 years now. There was a revision process in 2006, and now we're taking another look at it now, 2015, 2016. Prior to Act 64, the two categories of farms that have been had a special individualized or general permit were large farm operations or medium farm operations. And broadly speaking, those are farms which have 200 or more mature dairy cows, for example, more than 300 beef cows, more than 3,000 goats, for example. What Act 64 set out for the agency to take a look at and set some baseline standards and requirements is we need to define what a small farm operation is and come up with requirements for small farm certification and thresholds for who would need to be under that small farm certification. These group of small farms that will need to be certified will be subject to regular inspections, as well as a few other standards which regular farms which need to follow the full RAPs would need to follow. And I should say, well, we'll get to that in the next slide, but this is a draft right now, so this is draft stage. We don't expect to have a final draft ready until March. Some other areas where we need to take a look at and come up with some more rigorous standards for include nutrient storage, soil health, looking at buffer zones, livestock exclusion, and nutrient management. For 2018, we will need to reopen the RAPs and include new standards for tile drainage. So this round will end in 2016, and we'll open them up a year or two after that to take another look at tile drainage. So I'm going to run through the timeline, talk about where we've been, where we're going. Today is the 11th of January. And so far we have finished our roadshow of 10 large public meetings, which we held statewide from Enosburg down here in Brattleboro. Really good turnout here from a lot of the small farms and some of the medium and large farms in the area, which came out to listen to the rules and share feedback about what they heard. About 50 or so individuals are there. Well over half of them were farmers, so that was great turnout, and it was great for the agency to my previous position, I worked a lot in this area, or some in this area, and so I have an idea of, there's a lot of, vibrant agricultural activities here and throughout the state, and which is good for the agency to see the number of small farms that are active in this county. So that was a great experience there. So we held over 10 public meetings, almost 600 people, 580 people attended these 10 large public meetings. Well over half of them were farms, and well over half of those farms were small farms. So it's great to have that sort of participation and engagement from the farming community. In addition to the 10 large public meetings, we also held 21 small focus group meetings with farmer watershed groups, environmental groups, other conservation districts or other agricultural organizations or dairy co-ops who wanted to get together and discuss the draft rules in detail and give us some feedback and just really get to understand what the rules are. So we've been very open and continue to meet with watershed groups as they are interested, or farm groups as they're interested and want to meet and discuss the rules further. So right now we're still in what we're calling the pre-filing period. We have not entered formal rulemaking. Secretary Ross would say it was a draft of a draft. And that's exactly what it was. We were putting a rough draft out there to get feedback. We knew we did not have everything right, but we wanted to show the agricultural community where we were at and get some good feedback, and that's exactly what we did. The soft deadline for public comment closed on the 18th of December, but we're still accepting comment, whether written or verbal, because this process is ongoing. A bit of a summary about what we heard. We received over 160 written comments, totaling more than 350 pages. So it was a significant amount of feedback from all sectors that are interested in agriculture and water quality. And for this reason, due to the volume of written comment, which to me is great, it speaks to the engagement of agricultural producers statewide, we are going to need to push back our release of the second draft of the REPs. We're still in the midst of rewriting them and making sure we respond to all of the comments that were submitted. So we're looking towards maybe mid-February to have a second draft ready for release. So to stay on the timeline to have the RAPs finalized by July 1st, 2016, we're going to need to submit a final draft to the formal rulemaking process in spring of this year. So sometime mid-March is when, through the large outreach process we had already, and then the comment we'll receive on the second draft, that'll be less of a formal outreach meeting, large statewide public meeting process. Hopefully in the spring we'll be able to submit those for formal rulemaking, and that will trigger another round of the 10 statewide public meetings to make sure everyone is informed and can provide comment and has opportunity to provide comment on the draft rules. Just to provide some context, this red box is this process we're working on right now from October to July, and these are just some of the timelines that ag needs to meet over the next 5 years or so. For example, standards around custom manure applicators and the need for them to enter into a certification program happens in middle of the summer this year. Small farm certification program scheduled to go into effect July 1 of 2017. And then once again, the rules for tidal drainage in 2018. Now, just to do a little bit of background, everything that led up to this, not only the impetus of the total maximum daily load, the TMDL for phosphorus of Lake Champlain from EPA, pointing to the state need to make significant reductions, especially in agriculture, to improve water quality in the state, but also the passing of Act 64, which started this whole process and created new funding to help support implementation of this. Likewise, as was pointed out earlier, the USDA committed $45 million over 5 years to Lake Champlain, as well as a number of other federal grant programs to the state and other nonprofit entities to work on implementing ag water quality programs throughout the state. So kind of tying it all together, what Act 64 means to me is, it's an all-in effort. This is the statewide logo that's being rolled out to kind of emphasize that all sectors are being asked to make a lift. Some of them quite large in certain regions, but every sector is affected, from agriculture to roads to urban development. So every sector is being asked to make a lift here. And through this process, we're going to offer time, flexibility, and support to the municipalities and the farmers to make sure there's a successful rollout of these rules. So just real quick, I'm going to go through, as has been emphasized already today, just some of the reasons for Act 64. These are major water courses in the state of Vermont. Everything in red is something that is impaired and is on the EPA's 303D list. This is not all due to agriculture. This is all sources. We know agriculture plays a major role in the Lake Champlain Basin, in Medford Magog. There are other localized streams outside of those watersheds which have ag impairments, but for example, combined sewer overflow for St. Johnsbury. We got mine, issues in Stratford. So this represents a whole, every industry or every land use. These are the orange, or I guess yellow on this projector, priority rivers and streams, the ones that are being monitored and could go to red, but we don't want them to. And Act 64 is asking us to take a look at, the agency take a look at agriculture, create some stronger performance standards, and help farms through outreach and education implement additional conservation practices so that we can prevent these yellow streams from going red where we can. This is just a land use map showing green is forest, yellow is cropland or all ag use, and purple is developed land. And as you can see, we have, as was mentioned earlier, significant ag land use in the North Lake, in Otter Creek. The Medford Magog here has significant ag use. In some part, fourth largest dairy receipts come from Orange County, some more intense ag here. But just giving a sense of where some of the impairments correlate. Why, again, the trend line here, this is the trend line, this is phosphorus in Lake Champlain. It continues to get worse despite farmers stepping up to the plate and implementing conservation practices on their farms. We need to do more, and this is some of what the RAPs hope to address. This is just some data that, as was alluded to earlier, looking at the Connecticut River, the TMDL for dissolved oxygen in Lake Champlain. Nitrogen is a large driver of that. And from our watersheds up above Springfield, taking a look at some of the non-point source pollution and agriculture on this part of the state definitely does play a role in that, or has a role to play, and we'll be looking at it. This is obviously, it's a statewide, the REPs are statewide, but it's from a TMDL perspective, could be some focus on ag and non-point source pollution in the near term up here. We talked about some of the lifts that ag needs to make. For example, in the Missisquoi Bay Basin, they need to reduce agricultural contributions of phosphorus by 82%. So some real work needs to be done. But luckily, we have significant amounts of technical and financial assistance to assist with the planning and implementation of conservation practices on farms, not just from federal partners and from also some nonprofit partners, but the state of Vermont as well. The Clean Water Fund was mentioned. 1.75 million, last I checked, was earmarked to go for either direct to farmers or to support the partner network to help connect farmers with the available technical and financial assistance resources. Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, again, $45 million over 5 years, the largest pot of money that's out there for farmers to address crop BMPs to headquarter BMPs. So the whole farm planning, NRCS is a big partner there. The state of Vermont Agency of Agriculture, while we are the regulatory agency for agricultural operations, we also have a technical assistance and financial assistance arm through our best management practices program, where we work non-regulatorily with farms of all sizes to help them identify and implement conservation practices on their farm. So, not much time or no time to talk about what's in the rules, but the next slide is the website that you can go to if you just Google VAAFM RAP. The main website for us will come up, and it's a clearinghouse of this full 40-slide presentation. There's a copy of the public meeting. One of the public meetings was recorded and it's up on the web page. All of our fact sheets are available. I have some fact sheets as well I'll put out after this, which please feel free to grab or ask me questions afterwards if you want to discuss more in detail. But I just wanted to highlight some areas of specific consideration we put out to the agricultural community, saying here are some requirements that Act 64 laid out for us, as well as some of our own increases in performance standards that we really would like some feedback on. And this table we put out, with the addition of some cover crop requirements and manure and waste application standards, these correlate pretty well with the public comment we received. Small farm definitions and certifications was a big area. We heard about the thresholds potentially being too low or too high in some cases. Nutrient management planning standards for small farms who we need to certify. We heard a lot of feedback about that. We heard livestock exclusion standards. We heard a lot of positive feedback that we were flexible and realistic in the rules we put out and they'd be effective by excluding livestock in the production area. That was an area of feedback. Cover crop requirements, I'll put in there twice, I guess, because this is one of the biggest areas of feedback we heard, specifically around dates throughout the state. And then, required farm operator training is one of the requirements laid out in Act 64, and we heard a lot of feedback. In some cases, maybe producers need more feedback. So we're going to be taking a look at all of these areas, and I believe on my time, I'm pretty well out of it. So this is where agr.rap.vermont.gov. You can mail it to the agency. You can talk to me, but please write it down. That's the easiest way for us to, make sure it's fully considered. This web address is still live and will be live through the rest of the process. So as you read or have questions, please, this is a great place to go. My inbox is very cluttered and I don't want to lose anything. And then this URL down here, if you want to reach the clearinghouse of all the information we have up there. So, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. This is, I was feeling bad that we've asked everyone to do an impossible assignment and get all this done in this time. You guys all did a great job, so thanks. Chris, you want to moderate the question section here, or Kim? I'll turn that over. And when you're done at the very end, I know Mitch has a couple of things he wants to talk about for the Child Unlimited piece. But thank you, everybody. It's really been quite informative.
Yes, so are there any questions? We've got all of our speakers here, and I'm sure they would be.
Oh, not a question. I wanted to mention, try to get everything you mentioned, get the emails and get the URLs down. But if you got questions later on and you didn't get that, I don't think they'll mind me saying that Windham Regional is your best one-stop shop to get a question in and get directed to the information you need.
Absolutely, and I can make PDFs of all of these PowerPoint presentations and make them available to everyone. So if you've, I don't know if you signed in when you walked in the door, but if you haven't, it would be great to get you just to sign in. And then if you leave your email address, then I can send you PDFs of the presentations.
We'll have it, we can also put the presentations on our website. We'll have the natural resources button.
Yeah.
And of course, we're being recorded, and so it'll be available on BCTV, and we'll also have this recording available on our website as well.
Yeah. any questions for the speakers?
For Ryan, just, I noticed that there were some, where are you? Oh, there you are. I noticed that there were some, it appears to be rivers in Windham County that were impaired, you know, in red and then yellow, not wanting to go. Can you identify what rivers those are, Marie?
Every.
Right in Brattleboro here, Crosby Brook which is the one that flows through the roundabout at exit 3, is impaired for sediment. The Whetstone Brook is impaired for bacteria. A section of the West River is impaired for bacteria. Oh goodness. The Connecticut River is impaired for flow. There's a whole bunch of things, and it's all in the new basin plan, which was just signed off a week ago.
Deerfield. Did you say Deerfield?
The Deerfield is impaired, has flow issues. So there's a number of them in our region. There's some streams up by Stratton and stuff that
Yeah,
are
you see that
acid
between
impaired,
Bennington
and a
and
bunch of the
Windham County
lakes.
there.
Yeah, that's
There's
where.
several red areas, and that's a little misleading. I mean, those aren't agriculturally or biologically impaired. They're just acid rain. There's nothing really we can do about those. Western slopes.
No,
Well, I don't know whether they're-
headwater streams.
Yeah, as a river advocate, I don't know whether they're officially impaired, but having 2 flood control dams that do not operate as the agency would like them to is an impairment on the West River. Now, true, acid rain comes to us from other states, but there are impairments that we are doing to ourselves.
With major waterways like the Connecticut River and Lake Champlain, when they have multi-states legislation impacting them, you know, with New York State and New Hampshire, I was just wondering, how do their laws and regulations differ from ours? Are they better, worse, and how does that play into, if they are worse, how will those New York farms that are polluting in the Lake Champlain region impact our numbers, and how do we decide if that's a Vermont farm problem or an other state issue?
So, New York will likely be revisiting their TMDL as soon as the state of Vermont finishes finalizing theirs with EPA. You know, modeling allocates load based on gauging stations, and so New York is going to have to take a look at some of their land use. Of course, they have the Adirondack Mountains there, which does not have a lot of agriculture and a large part of their drainage. But for the ag that they do have, they're going to have to take a look and potentially revise some of their rules, or change some of their standards to potentially meet a lower threshold on the total phosphorus loading, or meet more rigorous standards. So they definitely are part of the solution, and they're going to be, and they have been at the table, and this has been an ongoing process, but they're going to have to enter into their own process likely shortly after.
And what about New Hampshire?
As far as the Connecticut River?
Yeah, with their standards, are they already up to what our standards will be in this coming year?
If I could, EPA has to approve each state's water quality standards. And this whole discussion about impaired waterways is a matter of the waters not meeting the state's water quality standards. In terms of the Long Island Sound overloading of nitrogen, creating that dead zone down there, EPA has worked with the state of New York, the state of Connecticut. They're meeting with the state of Massachusetts next week, and they have already applied a standard relative to nitrogen discharge to wastewater treatment facilities in both Vermont and New Hampshire. And so EPA is sort of that next level up, making sure things are consistent and fair in terms of who's contributing what to cleanup of the waters of the United States.
How does David, maybe you can answer this, how does the Silvio Conte and the possible expansion of that, how does that figure into the equation with the Connecticut River Valley?
Only in the situation where a piece of land is a unique community, whether it's a floral or fauna or a unique community, or harbors a threatened or endangered species, would Conte sort of intervene in terms of any of the water quality, and they wouldn't intervene at a regulatory level. It's a matter of a willing landowner selling that area that's a community to the Conte Refuge, if it's terrestrial. If it's water, then in fact they would work with the state to see that the state laws protected that endangered species. But that would be all that would trigger Conte's interest.
Yeah, getting back to the nitrogen issue in the Connecticut River, we all know that phosphorus is, agriculture is a major contributor of phosphorus in Lake Champlain. But how much of the nitrogen load in the Connecticut is the result of agriculture? Have you been able to break that down between, you mentioned sewage treatment was a large contributor. Have they gone this far as to kind of split out what the nitrogen loads are from agriculture and roads and sewage treatment, et cetera?
Now, the level of study that I believe Jim showed in terms of apportioning sources to pollution, that work has not been done above Connecticut. Connecticut and New York, in terms of Long Island Sound, New York City, the Connecticut shore, the Rhode Island shore, they have all done that characterization down there, but it's not been done up here. And by the way, I might add that the contribution in terms of Vermont and New Hampshire is somewhere between 4 and 6% of the entire nitrogen contribution to Long Island Sound. So it's not like we have as far to go with nitrogen as we have to go with phosphorus, because we know we're the major contributor in the basin for Lake Champlain.
Other questions?
TMDL can mean a lot of different things depending on what's being discussed. Is there a quick layman's definition that we could all have to know? When you say TMDL, I don't know exactly which you might be referring to.
Right, TMDL, total maximum daily load, is a plan that's established for a water body based on, there's an equation for it, as part of this presentation, waste load allocation plus non-point source pollution essentially, plus margin of safety, plus something else. Basically looking at point, non-point source pollution and the margin of safety to come up with a total daily load in tons of phosphorus that could enter into Lake Champlain that it could, balance, be biologically, meet all the water quality criteria. So they take the load and they apportion it based on modeling to different land uses and come up with a reduction percentage in a particular watershed.
TMDL is a goal. It's a goal. The implementation plan is how you get there. We're in phase 1 and we're waiting for approval from EPA on our phase 1 plan. But the TMDL is the goal. Here's the maximum in order for the lake to meet our water quality standards.
David, who actually does the monitoring on the enforcement level?
Our agency, there are, who does enforcement or assessment in terms of phosphorus in the lake, and it's being done by the agency. That has been one of the problems. We have invested a significant amount of money trying to clean up Lake Champlain, and nobody has measured it. And we're just figuring out how to do it, and we are starting some edge-of-field monitoring, we are starting some in-river monitoring, and again, all is part of Act 64 to get a real handle on it.
David, you mentioned 2 flood control dams, and their operation and maintenance isn't what it could or should be. Has the Corps of Engineers stepped up to this? Are they involved in this at any stage?
Oh, they negotiate with environmental conservation all the time in terms of how the dams are operated for release, and I'm not quite sure what I think there's an inspection schedule or something that DEC does, right, with the dams, and because I've got pictures of DEC personnel and Corps personnel sort of walking through the tubes at Townsend, at Ball Mountain, doing their inspection, but I'm not entirely sure what the inspection schedule is. But I know that the number of releases for whitewater, always an ongoing problem, and or ongoing discussion. Sorry, it's not a problem. Ongoing discussion, and the way the release apparatus is designed, there are limitations, and it can't meet the way the agency would like to do it relative to sediment builds up behind those dams, as anybody from Townsend is aware. And if you don't operate it properly, you flush out a lot of sediment.
Which has happened.
Yeah, it's
Much of
happened
the
out of Ball Mountain
Yeah.
twice.
Jim, how are we doing on time?
You're about 5 minutes left.
All right. 1 or 2 last questions? All right. Oh, we got one.
It sounded as if the research on the Connecticut River has not been done yet. Is that true in relation to the amount of research that's been done up at in Lake Champlain? I'm just curious. I'm not inside one of these agencies. Is there an opportunity for colleges and educational institutions to partner with some of the government agencies to do some of that research? Because it seems like an incredible opportunity for students, the way that up at UVM they did that study.
The answer is yes, and some of the work done in Lake Champlain was done by the Rubenstein Center professors, and UMass is working on a flow model with TNC and a couple of other NGOs relative to the relicensing going on the 3 dams, but the answer is yes.
All right. I'd like to give a hand to all of our speakers. Thank you to our sponsors. All of you have been great in doing outreach and providing the space and everything. There's refreshments out back, so please help yourself before you leave.
And I want to say thanks to Kim for pulling all this together. And one other thing, and before we give it to Mitch, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about having to do this, about EPA making the state do, improve our water quality, and a lot of discussion about the cost. But the other thing I just ask everybody to think about is think about what the benefits are. Especially in Vermont, where, I mean, if you've been to other states, you don't, unless you've been to another state, maybe you don't really appreciate how much access we have to almost all waters throughout the state. I mean, they really are our waters, and we can really access all of them. And so think about what the value is, whether a stream's running by your house or not, if you can swim in it, if you can fish in it, if you can just not worry about your kids or grandkids or anybody else's kids, even your dog, you know, going into the water and not having to worry about it. So I mean, and you know, what is the value of a native brook trout fishery? What is the, I mean, even whether you care about trout or not, just the idea that our native fish can reproduce and have a fulfilling life in our streams and rivers. So, so just, I mean, so one of the things I would ask is, as we think about this, you know, just let's not lose track of, you know, if we talk about the cost of what these things are going to be, let's not lose sight of the benefits, including, you can think about the monetary benefits too. I mean, how much money would you pay for an unimpaired stream running through your town or by your home versus an impaired one? And the folk in Champlain, on Lake Champlain, they're dealing with that in very real monetary terms. They're monetizing what impaired water costs. But here, on our side of the ridge and in our basins, it may not be as direct. The monitoring may be different, and it may not be as apparent as algal blooms. But you still know whether or not that creek is running too warm or there are too many nutrients in it. So keep that in mind. The other thing is, while we talk about what towns and farms can do, think about what you can do in your own home. If you have a stream border, think about replanting that buffer, and not just the tree canopy, but the understory too. Think about what that's worth to keep that in place, and what you can do even to combat the the invasive species that will come in if we clear too much. So there's a lot that we can do even at our own homes, and frankly, a lot of it can be a lot of fun too. So I'll leave it with that. Thanks everybody for coming out. And Mitch, this is really at its core a TU meeting, so hopefully you're going to make a pitch for TU.
So I just want to, I'm Mitch Harrison, and I guess I'm the new elected president of the Connecticut River chapter of TU. Thank you. And I just want to thank the organizers, Chris and Kim and Jim, and anyone else who was involved in putting this together, and thank you for the panel. I thought everybody did a great job, and some good questions at the end. I also want to thank Jim for the time he's put in as the Trout Unlimited president.
Very undeserved, but I get blamed for bad stuff I didn't do, so I'll take it.
And he tells us that he's going to stick around and still be a part of the organization, which we're glad about. So just a couple more words here. So the presentations are great, and as I looked at images of scoured riverbanks and some overreactions to flood events in some cases, and some culverts that were maybe not planned the way they should be, and disconnected waterways, it can be discouraging sometimes to look at all that. But the way I look at it from a TU's perspective is opportunities. And there are lots of opportunities for us to get involved and collaborate with other people. And one of those opportunities will be this spring, and I want to mention that. We're going to take part in restoration on Saxon River. And we've made a monetary commitment to that project. And we're hoping to put forth some volunteer effort too. So, I urge you to. There'll be an email that I'm sure I'll send out. One of us will. I think I will. To remind you about that. It'll be sometime in the spring, probably in May. And also there'll be some information on a website that we have for TU for the chapter. It's tuconriver.weebly.com. So please check out information on that. We're hoping that will get people out and will contribute to restoring buffer zones and some other things in several stretches of the Saxon River. Another thing we'll be involved in this spring, we'll be setting up a table at the Harris Cove Wildlife Festival. And I think one of the things we're hoping to do is draw some new membership in and let people know that there is a TU chapter and that it is going to be an active TU chapter, and hopefully we can get some more people involved. So please visit us there, and hopefully we can get some people to volunteer at that table too. Our regular meetings are normally the meetings are normally in Westminster at the library or the Institute, which is attached to the library. And we don't have a date for that next meeting, but certainly when we figure that out, we will get word out there. That'll be at the website. There's also a Facebook page that Chris set up, and we both post things on there regularly, and we'll also send out emails on when that date will be.
And I'll just, on that real quick, I'll just note that today Newbrook Elementary, we made a contribution to a Trout in the Classroom project. That's where students basically raise trout from eggs. And then later they've gotten permission to release them in a brook in Newfane. So today they posted that they've received their eggs with eyes, and very excited. And so that's already bringing the next generation, kind of just making them aware about the whole life cycle of trout.
Yeah, and with that, I should mention that I'm a science teacher, and I take part in the Bird Trout in the Classroom program on the New Hampshire side. I work at Vilas Middle School in Alstead, and I've been doing the trout in the classroom for quite a few years now. So I'm glad that we were able to bring 2 new schools in on the program.
Sounds like you need a chiller.
Yeah, but I think Jim might have hooked me up with a loaner, so, which is good. Otherwise, we'd have to go a year without bird trout. Anything else that you can think of? I think we're set. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Oh, if there's anyone in the room who is not a TU member, but you're intrigued by the idea of maybe being a member, please see us. You can go to the website, of course, and join that way. But if you want to talk to us more about it, feel free. Thank you.